Welcome to the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast, where timeless biblical truths meet modern leadership. We are thrilled to have you join us on this journey of exploring how biblical principles can guide us in leading with wisdom, integrity, and purpose. Whether you're leading in the church, your workplace, or your community, this podcast is designed to inspire, challenge, and equip you for the road ahead. Let's dive into today's conversation and discover how Scripture shapes the way we lead.
Welcome back to Biblical Perspectives for Leadership.
It's always good to be back.
So today we are taking a deep dive into a story that, I have to say, it feels incredibly cinematic, but also undeniably heavy. We're looking at Exodus chapter 10, specifically verses 21 through 29. And honestly, if you pitch this story to Hollywood, they might say it's a little too intense.
It is intense. This is the account of the plague of darkness. And you're right. When you read through the material, you realize this isn't just, a story about ancient history or some freak weather pattern.
Right.
It is a profound study on leadership principles and really the realities of everyday life.
Absolutely. The material frames this perfectly. It's a clash of wills, a study in psychology, and it all comes down to this concept of, what the source calls complete obedience versus partial surrender.
That is the core tension here. No question.
And I have to say, looking at the text itself, there's one specific phrase in the description of the plague that just grabbed me. It says it was a darkness that can be felt. That gave me chills. I mean, it sounds more like a description of depression or maybe a toxic corporate culture than just the lights going out.
It's a terrifying image. And that connects directly to the leadership angle we need to explore today. Because leaders, they often face pressures that aren't just logistical, they're psychological, almost spiritual. There's this immense pressure to compromise, just to make the darkness go away. So if you're ready, let's unpack this thing.
I am so ready. Let's jump into the first segment. This sets the stage in Exodus chapter 10, verse 21, and the first part of verse 22.
Right. So the scene opens with a command from God to Moses. Verse 21 says, "Stretch out your hand toward heaven."
It just seems like such a simple physical action. Stretch out your hand.
Yeah.
You're asking for a cosmic event, and the trigger is, what, a hand gesture?
It is simple,
Yeah.
almost trivial on the surface. But, the material highlights a really key insight here. God often demands a simple physical act of obedience before he releases a major act of power.
That is a great distinction because, if you think about it, Moses isn't the one turning off the sun.
Not at all.
He doesn't have the voltage for that.
Exactly. And that's a liberating realization for any leader. Moses was not asked to create the darkness. That is way above his pay grade.
Yeah.
He was only asked to obey. The material puts it this way. The battle isn't, can God do it? The battle is, will I do what he said?
I love that. It takes the pressure off the leader to perform the miracle. The leader just has to perform the obedience.
That's it.
But let's be honest, sometimes that simple act is the hardest part because it feels foolish. You're standing there stretching your hand at the sky while Pharaoh's looking at you like you've lost your mind.
Precisely. It feels completely ineffective. But the everyday nugget from the material really brings this home.
Yeah.
Sometimes that stretch isn't some miraculous gesture.
Right.
In our lives, a stretch might look like making that difficult phone call you've been avoiding for weeks.
Oh, totally. That call where you have to admit you messed up the numbers or that the project timeline is off.
Or finally starting that budget, you need, but have been terrified to actually look at. Or just telling the truth when a lie would be so much easier. Or apologizing. These are small acts, simple physical acts of speaking or moving. But they're the stretch that can unlock the breakthrough.
So Moses stretches out his hand, and the response is immediate. The lights go out. But not just the lights. Let's look at Exodus chapter 10, verse 22, the second part, through verse 23a.
The text describes it as thick darkness that lasted for 3 days.
And this brings us back to that phrase I mentioned. The material notes that the text specifically says it was darkness that could be felt.
It's evocative, isn't it? The Hebrew implications there suggest something heavy, oppressive. This wasn't just, it's nighttime. This was immobilizing.
The sources point out the really practical side of this. I mean, if you are in darkness that thick where you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face, you can't function.
Right. Think about the paralysis. It affects movement first. You can't see where to step, so you just stop moving. You freeze.
Then it has to hit your confidence.
Immediately. You start second-guessing everything. Is there a wall there? Did I just hear something? You lose all your reference points. And crucially for leadership, the material points out how it destroys relationships.
Oh, so just because you can't see the other person.
Exactly. People withdraw. When you can't see, you isolate. You hunker down. You stop collaborating because you're just trying to survive the sensory deprivation.
That makes so much sense. I think we've all been in seasons, whether leading a team through a crisis or navigating a really tough patch in our families, where the darkness feels exactly like that. It's heavy. You feel stuck. You feel isolated.
Exactly. The material calls these dark seasons. And the insight here is really challenging. Sometimes that pressure isn't because you're lazy or you did something wrong. It's spiritual pressure designed to expose what you rely on besides God.
That is a hard truth. It forces you to ask, so what is my light source?
It is. And, there's a cultural context here, too. Remember, Egypt wasn't a secular society. They had a pantheon of gods. And who was the big boss?
It was Ra, right? The sun god.
Correct. They worshiped the sun. Their entire theology, their agriculture, their sense of security was tied to the sun rising every day.
So this plague wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a theological takedown.
It was God saying, I'm turning off your main god. It demonstrated authority over the exact thing that culture trusted for direction in life. It stripped them of their false security.
So you have the entire Egyptian empire just paralyzed, terrified, unable to move for 3 days. But, and here's where the story gets really interesting, it wasn't dark everywhere.
No, and this is the pivotal contrast. This is the turn.
Let's look at Exodus chapter 10, verse 23, the second part. It says, but all the Israelites had light where they lived.
That but changes everything.
It's like a split screen in a movie. You've got total blackness on one side, and then in the neighborhood of Goshen, the lights are on, kids are playing, people are cooking dinner.
It represents a core theme in this narrative. God can judge a surrounding system while preserving his people inside of it.
I think that is such an important distinction because so often when things get bad in the culture or the economy, we assume we're going down with the ship.
Right. If the market crashes, we crash.
Yeah.
If the culture goes dark, we go dark.
Yeah.
Right. But the expert view here, and what the material really emphasizes, is the difference between removal and coverage. God didn't teleport the Israelites out of Egypt yet.
No.
They were still physically in the land of darkness. They could probably hear the Egyptians screaming in the dark. But he provided coverage amidst it all.
They had light where they lived.
That is the key phrase.
Yep.
For a leader, this is a massive responsibility. The leader nugget from our sources talks about the responsibility to keep light in the house.
Even if the culture outside is dark.
Especially then, if you're leading a team during a market crash or leading a family during a crisis, your job is to maintain the tone, to give the faith, the integrity, the stability. That is the light in the dwelling.
That's powerful. You don't measure favor by looking at the world news. You measure it by looking at your own home. Do you have peace? Do you have direction?
Exactly. Don't let the darkness out there determine the atmosphere in here. You have to be the thermostat, not the thermometer.
So 3 days pass. The pressure is immense. And Pharaoh, who's sitting in this heavy, felt darkness, probably realizing his sun god isn't picking up the phone, he finally breaks. He calls for Moses.
And this leads us to the negotiation in Exodus chapter 10, verses 24 through 26. And I want everyone to pay attention here because this is where the leadership lesson gets really, really sharp.
Pharaoh makes an offer in verse 24. He says, go, serve the Lord. Your little ones also may go with you.
It sounds like a victory, right? I mean, up until now, he wouldn't let the kids go.
It sounds like a total win. He's saying, okay, take your families, go worship. It's like 99% of what Moses asked for, but there's a catch.
There is always a catch when you're negotiating with a system that doesn't want to let you go. He adds, only let your flocks and your herds be left behind.
So you can go, but leave your livestock.
This is the trap. The material calls this the compromise offer.
Why is it a trap? I mean, on the surface, if I'm Moses, I'm thinking, hey, we get freedom, we get our kids. Who cares about the cows? Let's just go.
Because pressure exposes what's in the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Pharaoh is trying to maintain leverage. Livestock that represented their entire economy, their wealth. If they leave the livestock, they're just destitute refugees. They'll have to come back.
Okay.
But more importantly, livestock was the primary means of sacrifice.
So he's saying, go worship God, but leave behind the very things you need to worship him with.
Exactly. It's a brilliant, sinister move. And the everyday nugget here is fascinating about the enemy's tactics. The material suggests the enemy rarely says, don't son of God at all. That's too obvious. We'd reject that.
Right. If someone walked up to you and said, renounce your faith, you'd say no.
Instead, the voice of compromise says, Serve God, but don't take everything with you.
Go to church, but keep that one bad habit.
Lead with integrity, but keep that one secret area of your life hidden. Or worship, but keep control of your finances. It is partial surrender. It's saying, you can have the spiritual part of my life, but I'm keeping the practical assets.
But Moses isn't having any of it. His response in verse 26 is, well, it's legendary. He says, our livestock also shall go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind.
Not a hoof. It is such a granular, definitive statement.
It's almost funny. He's looking at the most powerful man on earth and saying, we aren't leaving a single hoof. But his reasoning, that's what I want to understand. He says, for we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there.
And that is the profound theological point. Moses is basically saying, we cannot leave our resources behind because we have an uncertainty principle. He doesn't know what the cost of worship will be yet.
That is huge. If they had left the flocks, they might have arrived at the mountain. God asks for a sacrifice, and they'd have to say, sorry, we left that back in Egypt because the deal was too good to pass up.
Exactly. And this applies so directly to us. We can't negotiate away our resources, our time, our talent, our energy, our capital, because we don't yet know the full scope of what God will require of us in the future. We have to bring it all.
That is a serious warning for leaders. Because when you are tired, compromise looks really efficient.
It does. The source material notes that compromise sounds very reasonable when a leader is fatigued. Moses had been fighting this battle for a long time. It would have been so easy to say, okay, fine, we'll take the kids and leave the cows. At least we're out of the darkness.
But he didn't. He held the line. Not a hoof. He realized that partial obedience is actually disobedience.
And that refusal forces the final break. We move into Exodus chapter 10, verses 27 through 29.
Verse 27 says, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go.
And we've discussed this idea of hardening before in other deep dives. It's not that God is just winding up a toy soldier to be evil.
Right.
The material explains that because Pharaoh had resisted repeatedly, 10 times now, this hardening just confirms a settled pattern.
It's like cement drying. At first it's pliable, you can move it, but eventually it sets.
Yes. The everyday nugget here is that delayed obedience doesn't stay neutral. It becomes defended. What you repeatedly refuse to do, you eventually justify not doing. And then your heart gets hard. You lose the ability to even feel the conviction anymore.
And then comes the explosion. Verses 28 and 29. Pharaoh just snaps. He says to Moses, get away from me. Take heed to yourself and see my face no more, for in the day you see my face, you shall die.
It's a death threat. It's hostile. The negotiation is completely over.
And Moses' reply is so chillingly calm. He just says, you have spoken while I will never see your face again.
There's a massive leadership lesson in that exchange that the sources highlight.
What's that?
Spiritual maturity includes knowing when a conversation is over.
That's heavy.
There's a time to stop arguing with Pharaoh. There's a time to realize that no more words will fix this. No more negotiation will solve this. Moses accepts the dismissal. He doesn't beg. He doesn't try to offer a counter deal like, okay, maybe just half the cows. He just accepts that the door is shut.
The material calls this the slammed door.
Yes. And the insight is that some goodbyes are protection, not punishment. A slammed door can actually be guidance. Moses knew it was time to stop talking and start preparing to move.
That is such a hard thing to accept in the moment, though. When a relationship ends, or a job ends, or a negotiation falls apart, it feels like failure. It feels like we didn't pray hard enough or work hard enough.
It feels like failure, yes. But look at the narrative arc. In this story, that slammed door was the final step before their liberation. If Pharaoh had said, okay, let's keep talking, they might have stayed in bondage for another year, just negotiating terms. The slammed door pushed them toward the exit.
So the death threat was actually the launch codes for their freedom.
Exactly. Sometimes you need a Pharaoh to kick you out so you can finally go to your promised land.
Man, there is so much to chew on here. It's so dense. Let's try to wrap this up and summarize the key takeaways from the sources for everyone.
Sure. I think we can distill this into 3 main points. The first big takeaway is about the nature of the darkness itself. Darkness is real, and it can be felt, it can immobilize you, but it is not in charge.
Right. And as we saw with the Israelites in Goshen, you can have light in your dwelling even if the world outside is pitch black. Your internal state does not have to match your external circumstances.
Exactly. The second takeaway is about decision-making. Don't make permanent decisions in temporary darkness.
That is good. When you are feeling that pressure, that felt darkness, that is not the time to quit or sign a bad deal or compromise your values just to get relief.
Which leads to the third and probably most critical point. Don't negotiate your obedience under pressure. Remember the not a hoof principle.
The enemy, or just the pressure of life, will always offer you a partial exit. Go, but leave something behind. Succeed, but leave your family behind. Win, but leave your ethics behind.
And we have to be like Moses and realize we need everything God has given us, every hoof, every talent, every resource for the journey ahead. We just can't afford to leave anything at the negotiating table.
So for the listener, the material suggests an action plan. And honestly, this is a bit of a challenge.
It is. The challenge is to identify your Pharaoh compromise.
What is the one thing you are tempted to leave behind right now? Maybe it's your integrity in a business deal because money is tight. Maybe it's your Sunday morning habit because you're just so tired. Maybe it's your generosity because you're scared of the economy.
Identify it, and then decide you're not a hoof line. Maybe even write it down. I will obey God fully in this area. I am not leaving this behind.
And finally, protecting the light in your house.
Yes. Choose a habit prayer, scripture, boundaries, maybe just a no phones at dinner rule that keeps the light on where you live, regardless of the cultural forecast outside.
I love that. I want to leave everyone with one final thought to mull over. We talked about Moses refusing to leave the livestock because he didn't know what they would need to serve the Lord.
Right. The uncertainty of the future requirement.
So here's the question. What if the very thing you are tempted to leave behind in a moment of compromise, that habit, that standard, that relationship, is the exact thing God plans to use for your future worship?
That is a heavy question.
Are you willing to walk away from the negotiation table to keep it?
That's the not a hoof mentality.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Exodus chapter 10. We will see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast. I hope today's insights have encouraged and equipped you to lead with faith, wisdom, and purpose. Remember, the greatest leader of all time taught us that true leadership is about serving others. If you enjoyed this episode and podcast, be sure to subscribe, share it with others, and leave a review. It helps us reach more people with these transformative truths. Until next time, keep leading with grace and walking in purpose.